Now there's one other object type in Amorphium that hasn't been discussed yet, and that is the smoke object. And the reason I'm discussing that here in the lighting section is because it really works hand in hand with lights. And let me just show you a little bit about how smoke works. Now, to create a smoke object, you just click on the smoke icon here, and then click and hold down the mouse button and drag until you create the size of a smoke object that you want. And you'll see this spherical kind of wireframe here representing where the smoke object is. Now, a smoke object is a volumetric region of 3D space that a fractal smoke or cloud pattern exists inside it. Now, there's a bunch of properties you can change on smoke objects, and you can change those by going into the properties, and then there's two parameters here that allow you to change the setting for the smoke within inside the region of smoke here. So you have the color of your smoke, which right now it's set to white, and I'm going to actually make it a little bit less white. You have density and contrast and frequency. Now, density is how thick the smoke is. If I were to change this to 0, there would be no smoke. 100 would be so thick you can't see through it. It would be almost solid of the color that you choose. So I'm going to actually bring the density down a little. Let's actually make it closer to 30 there. Now, contrast and frequency, what contrast is there's an actual like cloud pattern to smoke. And actually I'll go ahead and render one real quick so you can kind of see the cloud pattern in the smoke here. I'll just render one so you can see the cloud pattern within the smoke. That should go pretty quick because I haven't changed too much. Okay, so now you can see that there's smoke now in my scene, and you can see the fractal pattern here. I was mentioning before how it's uneven smoke in the scene. If I turn the contrast up, the difference between the thinner and denser areas are going to have more of a hard edge between them. You'll start to see them more defined. Where if the contrast is down, this pattern would almost fade away and it would be more of a solid color haze. And then the frequency adjustment would actually adjust how big this pattern is. The smaller the frequency, the smaller the pattern gets. So now a few other options within smoke are, now that we've talked a little bit about these, and the render tab here, you have three more options. Now you have receive shadows, which will allow the smoke to receive shadows and actually cast shadows within the smoke. So you'll see like rays, so to speak, within the smoke. Number of samples is how many samples it does between the end and beginning of the ray. So the more, of course, samples, the smoother the line is going to be for the rays. If this was really low, you'd see almost like a stair-step pattern in the ray. And I'll show that a little bit more a little bit later. And then random sampling is a really fine noise pattern, like a almost static pattern of really small pixels to give it a grain, like a film grain-ish look to the smoke. So it's not as flat. And the higher this number, the more defined the grain is. The lower the number, the less defined. So I'm going to actually lower this. Now, with receive shadows on, it's going to create a ray off of this where the shadow comes off. Now, sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, and part of the reason why is that if you've got a lot of smoke between your camera and the object, it's going to drown out that ray a little bit and it's going to be hard to see. So you really have to play with it to get the rays to show up in your renders. And let me just show you a little bit, and let me zoom my camera in a little bit here. And I'll actually make this object a little bit bigger. Let's make the object a little bit bigger and hope that we can get some. I'll make the cloud. Actually, let's make the smoke a little smaller, and we'll make the actual object here bigger. Now, let me move this a little bit. So let me go ahead and render. Now sometimes the rays won't always come out very definite in this type of situation. Okay, you can kind of see a little bit of the rays going on in here, where you can see it's not only casting a shadow on the ground, but you can see where the pattern is getting a little less dense right here because it's casting a shadow in the environment. And you can see the noise pattern that's in there as well from the random sampling setting. Yeah, as you can see here, it's really hard to kind of see that, but I have a better example, which I'll show you next, of where rays will actually come in handy. And I have a better example of showing this, and let me show you that now. And I'll go ahead and open a project that I have here. And this is also included on the CD, so you can play with it as well. Now, what this scene is, and let me look at the side view here. This is just a big box object in my scene, and I've got a smoke object here engulfing the scene, and I've got a light coming from behind, where if I go to an isometric here, you can see I've got a light shining from behind. I've got the text smoke cut out of this object, and my camera is looking at the little holes. And so since I have shadow casting on the smoke, the only place that smoke is going to be visible is coming out of where the light's coming out of those holes. So I'll get these light rays that will be shining out of the smoke here, and I could animate the light and move the light, and then the smoke would move. But let me just show you what that image looks like. I rendered it earlier because it takes a while to render, because when you start to deal with smoke, your render times will start to increase as you increase the quality of the smoke so that you can get the render that you want. So now let me go ahead and open this file. Now I rendered this previously because it takes a long time to render, and this is what it looks like. So what I've done is that with that light shining from behind, it's actually causing the smoke to kind of ray out from here, and you can see the stepping going on in here. If I had to turn down in the smoke the number of samples, if I were to change that, you can see the stair stepping happening in here, and it's actually, there's a lot of steps going on in here. If I had to turn down the number of samples in smoke right here under render, the number of samples is at 70, which took quite a bit of time to render actually. If I had turned this back down to the default 32 or even less than that, there would be a whole lot more steps in the fog render here. So you can get some decent looks out of this, and you could animate this with the light moving across and get some rays coming out of here. But it does step a little bit, and the render time will increase drastically to get the amount of steps that you need to get it to look smooth. So, but that's what smoke does. It allows you to be able to do this kind of effect, and it can be useful. You can get some good results out of it, but it takes a lot of time to play with and tweak to get the desired look that you want. So go ahead and play with it and see if you can get the results you like, but I find that I don't use it as much just because it does take off a lot of time to render, and it can be a time-consuming operation, but you can get good looks out of it. So that's basically how smoke works.